On Thursday, 5th December 1867, 29-year-old solicitor's clerk Frederick Baker appeared before Mr. Justice John Mellor at Winchester, accused of the murder of Fanny Adams at Alton. The prisoner stood in the dock and faced the judge. He was described as being a young man of average height, but his clothes were well worn. Holding his head high in what was described as a defiant manner, he had a pale complexion, a prominent nose, with a receding chin and forehead, which were exaggerated by the fact his long black hair had been swept back, and he was clean-shaven. When the charge was read out, Baker pleaded not guilty in a faint voice. Fanny Adams was the daughter of George Adams, a bricklayer, and his wife Harriet. She'd been born on 30th April 1859 and lived at Tanhouse Lane in Alton in Hampshire with her 5 siblings. She was described as tall, comely and intelligent, but looked older than her 8 years. 8-year-old Minnie Warner told the court that she, along with Fanny Adams and her younger sister Lizzie Adams, were playing in a meadow known as Flood Meadow that sunny afternoon of Saturday 24th August 1867. She said that Baker had approached the girls from behind and gave Minnie a penny halfpenny and gave Fanny some of the halfpence. He then went on to give 2 of the girls 2pence and told them to go home and spend the money. He even picked some berries for them. He then picked up Fanny, but she was shouting that she wanted to go home to her mother, but he was having none of it, and carried her down into a hollow. Minnie had watched as the pair went into the hop garden belonging to Mr. Chalcraft through a gate, still carrying the little girl. Minnie and Lizzie then headed towards home. When she reached her house at around 5 o'clock, she told her mother, Martha Warner, about the incident. She also told her she'd seen the same man on the Saturday before the murder, when she, Ellen White, and Lizzie Adams had been playing there. Fanny's mother, Harriet, noticed that her daughter hadn't come back with the other girls, so had asked Jane Gardner if she'd seen her. Mrs. Gardner lived in the same street, and she too had noticed Fanny hadn't come back. She asked Lizzie and Minnie, but they didn't know where she was, but they recounted what had happened earlier in the day. Mrs. Gardner and Harriet went looking for the missing girl and saw Baker at the top of the meadow, as if coming from the hollow. She recognised him. She asked if Baker had seen her daughter, but he replied he'd given her 3 halfpence. She had returned home as far as he was concerned, and she watched as Baker made his way from the meadow and over a bridge towards Basingstoke Road. She never saw him after that. She would later identify her daughter's stays, petticoat and hat, while her husband, George, identified his daughter's body. Sometime between 7 and 8 that evening, a search party, including Harriet, went looking for Fanny. It was Thomas Gates, a local labourer and war veteran, who made the first discovery that something was very wrong. He found a piece of her dress, covered in blood. Curious, he went into the hollow, and there he was met with a gruesome sight. He found a head with long hair lying on 2 poles. He then picked up a leg and a thigh, and around 16 yards away he found the torso, which had been cleaned out. The police were called. Harriet collapsed while on her way to tell her husband, who was playing cricket at the time and completely unaware that anything was amiss, but someone else had to tell him. Grief-stricken and angry, he returned home, loaded a gun, and was about to go looking for the culprit when neighbours stopped him. Henry Allen had gone to the hop garden in the evening of the disappearance and discovered a heart and lungs in an adjoining field. Thomas Swain, a shoemaker, found a foot on the other side of the road. Police Constable J. Waters searched the hollow on the Monday, but found nothing. In the local River Way, however, a pocket knife was discovered, and slightly further upstream, an eye was found. On 25th September, Mr. W.H. Walker, a painter in Alton, found a bloodied stone in the hop ground, with hair attached to it. Superintendent William Cheney was shocked by what he found. The girl had been mutilated and her dress had been cut up the front. Police took the body parts away to a local surgery on Amory Street, where a post-mortem was carried out by Dr. Lewis Leslie. Leslie concluded that the cause of death was most probably the blow to the head with the stone recovered. The body parts were sewn together and taken to the police station by Constable Thomas Light. At 9 p.m, Cheney and Police Constable George Watkins went round to Baker's office where he was still working. He asked him if he'd heard about the child murder, and he replied, "Yes, they say it's me, don't they? I am ready to go with you if you like." He had 2 knives on him and was taken into custody, charged with the murder of the little girl, but said he was innocent of the crime. Baker was told to strip, and police found that his left trouser leg and his left boot were damp. Asked how that had happened, he said he stepped into water. Blood was found on his shirt sleeve cuffs, but he claimed he didn't know how it got there. His office at Clement's Solicitors was searched, and a diary was found. On the 24th of August, he'd written, "Killed a young girl. It was fine and hot." On the Monday morning, he appeared before Edward Knight at Chawton and was remanded in custody on the charge of wilfully murdering Fanny. An inquest was opened into Fanny's death on Tuesday, 27th August, by the Deputy County Coroner, Robert Harfield. It was held in the Duke's Head Inn, where all the witnesses in the case testified. The verdict came back that Baker was guilty of the wilful killing and slaying of Fanny Adams, and he was later taken to Winchester Prison. The following day, the little girl was buried. Those same witnesses went on to give their accounts in front of Justice Mellor on 5th December. Also giving evidence was Baker's father, Frederick Baker Sr. He told the court his son had always been a weakly child and said that he had pains in his head with sickness. He had worked for a solicitor in Guildford, but found the work too heavy for his head and used to cry. Until he was 26, he never drank, but his fiancée had broken their engagement, and after that he appeared to be quite out of his mind. He'd disappeared in April 1865, and his father had had no idea where he'd gone. He also feared he would take his own life. He went on to say that his son had been the director of a savings bank, secretary of a debating society, and had been a Sunday school teacher for 12 years. Baker's sister, Mary Ann, corroborated her father's statements. Several others testified that he'd had mental health issues and was often in low spirits and melancholy. The following day, Friday 6 December, Baker was found guilty by the jury in just 15 minutes and sentenced to death. A plea of insanity was lodged, but this was rejected. On Tuesday, 24th December 1867, Baker was led to the gallows, where he was hanged by well-known executioner William Calcraft. A few days beforehand, he confessed to the killing, adding he was drunk at the time, as Morris Biddle, a junior clerk at the solicitor's office, had testified when he'd seen him on the day of the murder. He'd left his office at 1:30 and had made his way across the flood meadow to the first stile. He confessed to paying the children, taking Fanny, and murdering her. He'd used the pocket knife found on him to dismember her body, stating he'd sharpened it a few days beforehand. When he met people, he'd had to hide his bloodied hands under his coat, then had washed them at the river. He'd returned to the office and washed the knives, but Dr. A.S. Taylor, an eminent doctor at Guy's Hospital in London, had examined it, along with all the clothing discovered at the scene in October, and found a single speck of blood on one of the knives. Cheney then went back to the scene and completed his task. Around 6,000 people witnessed the hanging at the county jail in Winchester. That morning at 5 o'clock, he was visited by the chaplain, the Reverend Foster Rogers. At 7 o'clock, Baker ate a hearty breakfast, and at 20 to 8, the Under-Sheriff Thomas Burnett Woodham entered his cell. At 5 to 8, the bell of the jail began to toll, and accompanied by the chaplain, Under-Sheriff, surgeon, Deputy Governor John Gregg, and 10 warders, Baker proceeded to the scaffold. On Saturday, 28 March 1868, a headstone was unveiled for Fanny at Alton Cemetery, thanks to public subscription. It reads, "Sacred to the memory of Fanny Adams, aged 8 years and 4 months, who was cruelly murdered August 24th, 1867. Fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell." It is rather unfortunate that it's from this case the phrase "Sweet Fanny Adams" or "Sweet F.A." comes from.